You're 60 years old or close. You probably have around $300,000 to $580,000 saved. You did everything the financial industry told you to do. You maxed out your 401k. You diversified. You rebalanced annually. You survived 2008 and 2020. You think you're playing it safe. And right now, at this exact moment, you're making 5 errors that will destroy your retirement. Not might, will. Charlie Munger spent 60 years studying how wealthy people go broke. Not young people starting out, not reckless gamblers. Successful people in their 60s and 70s who built substantial wealth and then systematically destroyed it through 5 specific, predictable mistakes. Here's what nobody tells you. The errors that destroy retirement aren't dramatic. They're not obvious. You won't see them coming because they disguise themselves as prudence, safety, and responsibility. And by the time you realize what happened, you're 78 with half the money you should have and no time to fix it. Before we get into this, do me a favor, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's here. City, state, country. Just let me know. This is where people over 60 make catastrophic mistakes that compound into retirement failure. They think they're being careful, conservative, responsible, but they're actually engineering their own slow-motion financial destruction through 5 specific errors that all share one thing in common. They feel safe in the moment while guaranteeing failure over time. Here's what's really happening. You've switched from accumulation mode to preservation mode. That switch is necessary, but most people make it wrong. They preserve the wrong things. They protect against the wrong risks. They optimize for the wrong timeline. And those errors compound into outcomes that look like bad luck, but are actually mathematical certainties. The people who thrive through retirement understand which risks actually matter at 60. The people who slowly go broke are fighting yesterday's battles. And the difference between these two groups isn't knowledge or intelligence. It's understanding that the game changed the moment you turned 60, and most of the rules you learned no longer apply. You're 63. You have $620,000. Your financial advisor looks at you and says, "You're approaching retirement. We need to reduce risk. Let's move to 40% stocks, 60% bonds." You nod. This feels responsible, prudent, safe. You just made the first catastrophic error. Here's what you think is happening. You're protecting your money. You're reducing volatility. You're being age appropriate. The old rule was 100 minus your age equals your stock percentage. So at 63, being at 40% stocks feels conservative, but reasonable. But here's what's actually happening. You're guaranteeing that inflation will destroy you. Not immediately. Slowly, over 25 years. Because you're not retiring for 5 years. And once you retire, you're not dying in 10 years. You're likely living another 25, 30 years. That's a 30, 35-year timeline from right now, and you just locked yourself into an allocation that can't possibly keep pace with inflation over that timeline. Let me show you what this looks like. You retire at 65 with that 40-60 portfolio. Your $620,000 generates maybe 4 or 5% annually after inflation in a good environment. That's $25,000 to $31,000 per year. Add Social Security of $30,000. You're living on $55,000 to $61,000 per year. Today, that's workable. Tight, but workable. But here's where it gets catastrophic. At 3% inflation, which is conservative given recent history, your $55,000 in purchasing power becomes $41,000 at age 75. By age 80, it's $35,000. By age 85, it's $30,000. Your quality of life slowly, steadily degrades, not because you're spending more, because the money buys less every single year. And your ultra-conservative portfolio can't keep up because 60% bonds generating 4 or 5% nominal returns are losing to 3% inflation, plus the slow depletion from withdrawals. Here's why this matters more than you think. You didn't go conservative because you analyzed the math. You went conservative because you're afraid, and fear is a terrible financial advisor. After age 60, the financial industry trained you to think volatility equals risk. But that's wrong. At 60, volatility is just noise. The real risks are running out of money at 85, inflation destroying purchasing power, and healthcare costs exploding. None of those risks are addressed by going to 60% bonds. In fact, bonds make all three risks worse. Most people don't realize what's happening beneath the surface. They see their account balance holding steady and feel safe. Meanwhile, inflation is eating 3% per year. Real purchasing power is declining. But it's invisible because the nominal account balance isn't dropping. You don't feel poor at 65. You don't feel poor at 70. But at 78, you suddenly realize you can't afford the things you used to afford, and you don't understand what changed. What changed was you chose protection against short-term volatility over protection against long-term inflation. That's error number one. Let me be blunt. If you're 60, 65, and you're at less than 50% stocks, you're fragile. If you're at 30 to 40% stocks, you're engineering failure. The conservative choice that feels safe is the radical choice that guarantees slow poverty. And by the time you realize it, you're 75 and it's too late to fix. You survived 2008, you held on, your portfolio dropped 40%, but you didn't sell. You're proud of that. You learned the lesson. Don't panic. But here's what Munger understood. The real test isn't the first crash after you start building wealth. It's the first crash after you retire. Let me show you why this era is catastrophic. You're 64. You retire with $700,000. You feel great. 2 years later, you're 66. The market crashes 35%. Your $700,000 becomes $455,000. You've been retired for 2 years, living off the portfolio. You've withdrawn $80,000. Your portfolio should be around $620,000 before the crash. After the crash, it's $403,000. You open your account. You see $403,000. You had $700,000 2 years ago. You feel sick. And here's where error number 2 happens. You tell yourself you can't afford another loss. You're not 45 anymore with 20 years to recover. You're 66. So, you sell. You go to 80% cash and bonds. You protect what's left. That decision, that one decision, just destroyed your retirement. Not the crash, your reaction to the crash. Here's the math. Nobody shows you. If you stayed invested, that $403,000 in stocks recovers in 3 years. Historically, that's what happens. By age 69, you're back to $560,000 in the stock portion, assuming normal 10% annual recovery. Add your bond cash portion and withdrawals, you're stabilized. By age 75, you're ahead of where you started. The crash hurt, but you recovered. But you didn't stay invested. You sold at the bottom. That $403,000 in cash grows at 2 to 3%, while inflation runs 3%. You're losing ground in real terms every single year. By age 75, you have maybe $420,000 nominal dollars, which is worth about $350,000 in today's purchasing power. The crash didn't destroy you. The panic selling did. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Why do people do this? Why do they sell at the worst possible time despite knowing better? Because the psychology changes when you're no longer contributing. When you're 45 and the market crashes, you're adding money. Crashes are buying opportunities. Your paycheck keeps coming. You're not stressed, but at 66, you're not contributing. You're withdrawing. Every month, you're taking money out. When the market crashes, you're not buying the dip. You're selling into it to fund your lifestyle. The psychological reversal is total. Crashes go from opportunity to existential threat. And that fear drives panic decisions. This is why you felt X when Y happened. When you were 50 and 2008 hit, you held on because you were still accumulating. When you're 66 and the next crash hits, you'll panic because you're depleting. Same person, same market event. Completely different psychological position. The people who make it through retirement without this error have one thing in common: a cash buffer that prevents forced selling. If you have 3 years of expenses in cash when the crash hits, you don't panic. You know you don't have to sell stocks for 3 full years. The stocks can crash 50%, and you're fine. You're living off cash while they recover. That buffer is the difference between surviving a crash and being destroyed by one. But most people don't have that buffer. So when the crash comes, and it will come, they'll panic, they'll sell, and they'll lock in losses that can never be recovered. You're 62, you just retired. Social Security sends you a letter. You can claim $2,100 per month now, or $3,000 per month if you wait until 67, or $3,700 per month if you wait until 70. You think, I'll take it now. I've been paying in for 40 years. I want my money. Who knows if I'll even live to 70? You just made error number 3, and this one is irreversible. Here's the truth that contradicts everything your gut tells you. Claiming Social Security early is almost never the right financial decision for someone with a $300,000+ portfolio. Almost never. And yet most people do it anyway. Let me show you why this is catastrophic. If you claim at 62 instead of 67, you're taking a 30% permanent reduction in your benefit for the rest of your life. Not temporary. Permanent. $2,100 per month versus $3,000 per month. That's $10,800 per year for 25, 30 years. If you live to 87, that's $270,000 in lost income. And that's before adjusting for inflation. Social Security adjusts for inflation, so the real difference is even larger. But I need the money now, you say. Do you? You have $600,000. You can withdraw $30,000 per year at 5% and be fine. Use your portfolio to bridge from 62 to 67. That's 5 years. You'll draw down maybe $150,000. But in return, you buy an extra $900 per month for the rest of your life. That's a 72% return on the money you spent waiting. Show me another investment that guarantees a 72% return with zero risk. Here's what people miss. Social Security is longevity insurance. It's inflation-adjusted guaranteed income. Every extra dollar of Social Security you lock in is one less dollar your portfolio has to generate. And portfolio income is volatile, uncertain, and subject to sequence risk. Social Security is none of those things. People think claiming early is getting theirs before the system fails. But that's emotional, not rational. If you're worried Social Security will collapse, the solution isn't to take reduced benefits now. It's to delay for maximum benefits while the system still exists. Because if it fails at 75, you got 13 years of much higher income. If it doesn't fail, you got 25+ years of higher income. You win either way. The math is simple. Not easy, but simple. Use your portfolio from 62 to 67 or 70. Let Social Security grow. Lock in the higher benefit. That higher benefit reduces the pressure on your portfolio forever. It's the single best investment most retirees can make. But most people don't do the math. They do the emotion. They feel entitled to claim early. They feel like they're owed it. They feel uncertain about the future, and those feelings drive a decision that costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. You might be thinking, but what if I die at 68? Let me tell you why that doesn't work. First, most people don't die at 68. Actuarially, if you make it to 62, you're likely living to 85 plus. Second, if you do die early, your spouse inherits the higher benefit. Survivor benefits matter. Third, insurance is for unlikely bad outcomes. You insure your house even though it probably won't burn down. Delaying Social Security is insurance against living to 90. That's the risk. You should be insuring. That's the trap. The early claim that feels like a win is a 30% pay cut for life disguised as getting yours. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. Charlie, you're describing errors, but you're not giving me a system. What's the right allocation? What's the right withdrawal rate? What's the actual plan? Let me tell you why that question reveals you're still thinking the wrong way. There is no right allocation. There's no magic withdrawal rate. There's no one-size-fits-all plan. Because the question isn't what's the right system. The question is what system matches my specific situation. You're 62 with $500,000 and $40,000 in annual expenses. That's different from being 68 with $800,000 and $55,000 in expenses. Different age, different portfolio, different spending, different health, different Social Security situation, different life expectancy. The right answer for one person is wrong for another, but here's what is universal. The 5 errors I'm showing you. These destroy retirement regardless of your specific numbers. You can have $300,000 or $3 million. If you make these 5 errors, you're engineering failure. So stop looking for the perfect plan. Start looking for the errors you're currently making, because avoiding these 5 mistakes is more valuable than having the optimal allocation. A 50-50 portfolio with no errors beats a 60-40 portfolio with 3 errors every single time. The people who succeed in retirement don't have perfect plans. They have error-free execution. They don't panic sell. They don't claim Social Security early out of emotion. They don't retire without cash buffers. They don't underspend out of fear. That's it. That's the system. Now let me show you error 4, because this one is invisible until it destroys you. You retired last year at 65 with $750,000, all of it invested. 60% stocks, 40% bonds, no cash buffer, just a $15,000 emergency fund. You thought, why hold cash? It earns nothing. I need my money working for me. You just made error number 4. And when the next crash comes, not if, when, this error will devastate you. Here's what you don't understand. Sequence of returns risk is the single biggest threat to retirement success. Not market crashes, not volatility. The sequence, the order in which returns happen. Let me make this visible. 2 retirees, both with $750,000. Both retire at 65. Both get the exact same average returns over 20 years. Let's say 7% annually. But one retires in 2007, right before the crash. One retires in 2010, right after the crash. After 20 years, the 2007 retiree has $380,000 left. The 2010 retiree has $620,000 left. Same average returns, same withdrawal rate, $240,000 difference. Why? Sequence. The 2007 retiree experienced terrible returns in years 1-3. Their portfolio crashed right as they started withdrawing. They were forced to sell stocks at the bottom to fund living expenses. They never recovered. The 2010 retiree experienced terrible returns before they retired. Didn't matter, they weren't withdrawing yet. Then they experienced great returns during early retirement while withdrawing. They thrived. You can't control sequence, you can't predict it, but you can protect against it. And the protection is simple, a cash buffer. 3 years of living expenses in cash and short-term bonds. If you need $50,000 per year to live, you need $150,000 in cash. That's 20% of a $750,000 portfolio. When you retire, you set aside that $150,000. The remaining $600,000 stays invested. 70% stocks, 30% bonds. When the market crashes, because it will, you don't sell stocks. You live off the $150,000 cash for 3 years. The stocks can drop 50% and you don't care. You're not selling, you're waiting for recovery. This isn't theory. This is exactly what separated successful 2007 and 2008 retirees from failed ones. The ones with cash buffers survived and thrived. The ones without were forced to sell stocks at the bottom. They turned temporary market losses into permanent capital losses. Same market, same crash. Different systems, different outcomes. Now, here's where people resist. But cash earns nothing. I'm losing money to inflation. You're thinking about this wrong. The cash buffer isn't an investment. It's insurance. You're not trying to maximize returns on that $150,000. You're preventing catastrophic loss on the $600,000 invested portion. The cash buffer allows the invested portion to stay aggressive precisely because you have the buffer. Without the buffer, you have to be conservative with everything because you might need to sell at any moment. With the buffer, you can be appropriately aggressive with the invested portion because you know you won't need to touch it for 3 years minimum. The buffer doesn't reduce returns, it enables returns. The decision framework is this. Stop asking, is cash earning enough? Start asking, does this buffer prevent me from panic selling during crashes? If yes, it's worth it. Because panic selling during crashes is the difference between $380,000 and $620,000 after 20 years. When you're deciding on portfolio structure, the question isn't, how do I maximize returns? The question is, how do I survive the worst possible sequence of returns? And the answer is always the same. A cash buffer that prevents forced selling. Most people won't build this buffer. They'll retire with everything invested. And when the crash comes in year 1, 2, or 3 of retirement, and historically, you have about a 40% chance of a significant crash in your first 5 years of retirement. They'll be forced to sell, and they'll spend the next 20 years slowly running out of money, wondering what went wrong. This is the era nobody talks about. But Munger knew it was just as catastrophic as running out. Dying wealthy. You're 78. You have $850,000. You spend $40,000 per year. You're terrified to spend more. Every withdrawal feels dangerous. You haven't traveled in 5 years. You haven't helped your grandchildren. You haven't enjoyed life. You're hoarding money you'll never spend because you're afraid of running out. And at 85, you'll die with $700,000 in the account, having sacrificed 7 years of living for safety you didn't need. That's error number 5. And it destroys more retirements than running out of money does. Here's what people misunderstand. The point of saving for 40 years wasn't to die wealthy. It was to live well in retirement. If you spend 40 years accumulating and then 25 years too afraid to spend it, you failed at the entire purpose of money. Let me show you why this happens. You're 70 with $680,000. You're spending $45,000 per year. You run a calculator. If I spend $45,000 per year and get 5% returns, my money runs out at age 92. That scares you. So you cut spending to $38,000. Now the calculator says your money lasts until 97. You feel safer. But you just sentence yourself to 7 years of unnecessary deprivation. The psychology is this. You're optimizing for the worst-case scenario, living to 100, while sacrificing the base-case scenario, living to 82. You're making your likely 70s and 80s worse to protect against an unlikely scenario at 95 plus. That's backward optimization. Here's the reality most people can't accept. You're probably not living to 100. If you're 70 today, actuarially, you're living to 84, 87. That's 14, 17 years. Your $680,000 can support way more than $38,000 per year over 14 or 17 years. But you're planning for 30 years just in case. So you're underliving for 17 years to protect against maybe 5, 10 extra years you probably won't get. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The successful retirees I've watched don't plan to die with zero, but they plan to die with less than they started with. They understand that spending down the portfolio is literally the point. If you retire at 65 with $700,000 and die at 85 with $700,000, you successfully preserved capital, but you failed at retirement. You should have spent more, traveled more, helped family more, lived more. The mental model shift required is this. Stop thinking of your portfolio as something to protect. Start thinking of it as something to deploy. The question isn't, how do I make this last forever? The question is, how do I extract maximum life quality from this resource over my remaining years? This requires letting go of accumulation mindset. For 40 years, every withdrawal was failure. Every dollar saved was success. Now you need to reverse that. Strategic withdrawals are success. Hoarding is failure, but your brain hasn't caught up. You still feel guilty spending. You still feel anxious about withdrawals. You're still measuring success by balance instead of by living. Here's what this looks like practically. At 70, you have $680,000 and 20 years of life expectancy. That's $34,000 to $45,000 per year before factoring any returns. Add modest 4% real returns, and you can spend $55,000 plus dollars per year and still die with money left over. But you're spending $38,000 and feeling poor. Why? Because you're optimizing for immortality instead of for the life you're actually likely to live. The people who get this right do scenario planning. If I live to 82, what's the right spending level? Versus if I live to 95, what's the right spending level? Then they spend for the 82 scenario in their 70s, with the option to cut back in their 80s if they're still alive. They front-load the spending to the years when they're healthy enough to enjoy it. You might be thinking, but I want to leave money to my kids. That's fine. But be honest about the cost. If you want to leave $300,000 to your kids, you're choosing to underspend by roughly $15,000, $20,000 per year for 20 years. That's the trade-off. Your kids get $300,000 at your death, but you sacrificed $300,000, $400,000 in life enjoyment to give it to them. Make that trade consciously, not out of fear. That's the trap. The safety-seeking behavior that makes you feel responsible is actually robbing you of the retirement you saved for. And unlike the other errors, you can't fix this one retroactively. You can't get your 70s back at 85. Here's what connects all 5 errors. They're all optimization for the wrong risk at the wrong time. Error 1, too conservative. Optimizing against short-term volatility while exposing yourself to long-term inflation. Error 2, panic selling. Optimizing for immediate emotional comfort while guaranteeing a long-term failure. Error 3, early Social Security. Optimizing for certainty today while sacrificing income for 25 years. Error 4, no cash buffer. Optimizing for maximum returns while exposing yourself to sequence risk. Error 5, dying wealthy. Optimizing for immortality while sacrificing the retirement you saved for. Every single error is a trade-off where you protect against the wrong thing, And the reason you make these errors is psychological, not intellectual. You know better. But fear drives behavior. The shift required is this. At 60, you need to stop thinking like someone building wealth and start thinking like someone deploying a system over a fixed timeline. Those require completely different optimization functions. When you're 40, the right optimization is maximize long-term growth, minimize mistakes, survive volatility. When you're 60, the right optimization is maximize life quality over likely timeline, prevent catastrophic sequence risk, spend with confidence. Most people never make that shift. They keep using the 40-year-old optimization function at 60, and it destroys them. Not because they're stupid, because the game changed and nobody told them the new rules. From fear to calibrated confidence, you can't eliminate uncertainty. You can't guarantee you won't run out. You can't predict the future, but you can build a system that works across most scenarios. And once you have that system, you can stop being afraid. The confidence doesn't come from having more money. It comes from having a system you trust. Once you make this shift, once you genuinely understand that the risks at 60 are different than the risks at 40, everything changes. You stop overprotecting against volatility. You stop panic selling. You stop claiming Social Security early. You build the cash buffer. You spend with confidence. You stop making the 5 catastrophic errors because you understand what you're actually optimizing for. And suddenly, retirement works, not because you had more money, because you stopped fighting the wrong battles. Remember what I said at the beginning. You're 62 with $580,000 and you did everything right. But you're making 5 errors that will destroy your retirement, not might, will. Now you know the truth. The question isn't whether $580,000 is enough. The question is whether you'll avoid the 5 catastrophic errors that destroy retirement, regardless of portfolio size. Because people with $1 million make these errors and go broke slowly. And people with $400,000 who avoid these errors retire successfully. So here's what happens next. Most people will hear this and do nothing. They'll go conservative at 63 because it feels safe. They'll panic sell in the next crash. They'll claim Social Security early because they feel entitled. They'll retire with no cash buffer. They'll spend 20 years afraid to enjoy life. And at 80, they'll realize they engineered their own failure by optimizing for the wrong risks at every turn. A small group will hear this and restructure. They'll maintain equity exposure. They'll build cash buffers. They'll delay Social Security strategically. They'll survive crashes without panic. They'll spend with confidence in their 70s, and they'll die at 85, having lived well, left something behind, and never once felt poor despite having modest portfolios. The difference isn't intelligence. It's not starting capital. It's not luck. It's understanding that at 60, the risks change. And if you keep fighting yesterday's battles, you'll lose tomorrow's war. Retirement success doesn't belong to people with the biggest portfolios. It belongs to people who understand what they're optimizing for, who protect against the right risks, who make the shift from accumulation to deployment, who stop letting fear drive decisions. The 5 errors work like this. They disguise themselves as prudence while engineering failure. The people who recognize them thrive. The people who don't slowly go broke while thinking they're being careful. That's how retirement actually works. The errors are predictable. The outcomes are avoidable. Choose accordingly. Now, if you want more brutal honesty about building wealth and achieving financial independence, timeless principles that actually work instead of get-rich-quick garbage, subscribe to this channel. We don't promise easy. We don't promise fast. We promise truth.